It's now my privilege to introduce our guest for this morning, who, for those of you who are Breaking Bad fans, needs no introduction. But for those of you who may not be, and I'm sure there's maybe one or two, hard to believe, in the audience, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Stephen Michael Quezada. He is an actor, a writer, a stand-up comedian, talk show host, and a teacher, among many other things I learned this morning over breakfast. For the past 5 years, he's played DEA agent Stephen Gomez on Breaking Bad, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I want to make sure you all have the proper expectations here. It's not going to be all about charter schools. He has a long history of working with young people in Albuquerque, and we'll certainly talk about that some more. He has 3 daughters who attend a charter school in Albuquerque, the Public Academy for Performing Arts. As also I learned this morning, they're all teenagers, so his condolences, I suppose, or we should pass along our condolences. He served on the board of that charter school as a vice chair. And more recently, this February, he was elected to the Albuquerque School Board. And for those of you who don't know, Albuquerque is a city which has over 50 charter schools serving well over 10,000 students. And Albuquerque Public Schools is one of the authorizers in the city, which probably makes Stephen the most famous charter authorizer in America, I would have to say. And so for the next hour or so, Stephen and I are going to have a conversation, open it up to you all for questions, and hopefully we can get to know him a little better, and hopefully he can share with us some of his insights into his work, both with young people in Albuquerque and in the charter sector. So Stephen, please join me up on stage. You got it? Okay.
I'm going to move this a little closer because I'm not that tall.
So this actually, I don't know if this looks like your late night talk show set.
It kind of does. Yeah,
it? Where's I don't know where the band is or the the
they're on tour.
Acts.
They're on tour.
All right. Well, we should have put the whole thing together for you. But this is good because if I start asking you dumb questions, you just take over and we'll switch roles, whatever.
Questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're probably better at it than I am. All right. So you're on Breaking Bad, or you were until your untimely demise.
If you haven't seen that, he's
I'm sorry, that was just yeah, sorry about that.
Then you need to go catch up.
Yeah, exactly. So with a show of hands, how many of you have been loyal Breaking Bad fans on regular TV or Netflix, whatever your medium of choice? All right, so we have some neophytes in the audience.
That's right.
I should probably ask, how many of you have seen the last episode? Okay, probably all the people who are following. All right,
that are fans. Okay.
All right,
good.
so
you're safe.
Even though I did reveal, one of the key moments of the, almost it wasn't the last episode.
No, it was. I believe it was the third to the last.
All right, I'll try not to reveal any more secrets. But for those of us in the audience who aren't Breaking Bad aficionados, tell me what it's about.
Well, for me, I think everybody takes away what they got from Breaking Bad. For me, it was a really great character study for me about somebody who's making a really bad decision and has to live with that decision. And as long as you continue to make bad decisions, bad things happen to you. And it was almost, Shakespearean to me, and I think that's what drew a lot of people into this character and his story. And I think a lot of people were able to relate to this story because it took an average guy, somebody you wouldn't even notice in this crowd, and take him and turn him into Scarface, And that was the journey of what they decided they were going to do when they initially came up with Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad was actually conceived, by Vince Gilligan and a friend of his, Tom, who was one of the writers, and this is what happened. They worked on the X-Files together, and when the X-Files came to a close,
love that show,
which was another great show, came to an end, and so Vince calls Tom and says, now what? Now what are we going to do? You know, we don't have a job. He goes, well, maybe we should, you know, rent a Winnebago and drive around the country and cook meth. And Vince laughed. They laughed it off, and it was a joke. But I think within that week, Vince got this brilliant idea of a storyline that he was going to do, and wrote the pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so is Walter White really that bad? I mean, he's obviously does a lot of really horrible things.
He does.
So in his change from good, boring chemistry teacher to really evil meth cooker and dealer,
Yeah.
does it in your sort of analysis of the storyline? Is there sort of a good soul in there, or did he actually just like go all bad?
I think he wants to be a good soul, but who he really is deep down is that Heisenberg.
Yeah.
You know, and people who watch the show know the difference between Walter White and Heisenberg. And, you know, he suppressed it. He was just one of those guys that just didn't have the courage to be who he really was. Unfortunately, he was a bad guy, but he always seemed to, and the way that it was written so brilliantly, we always seemed to be cheering him on because we thought he was always doing it for the right reasons. And I think everybody kind of got a shock at the finale where he said, where he tells his wife, I did all of this for me.
Right.
Because he had never admitted that through the whole series. He always kept, you know, I'm doing it for Jesse, I'm doing it for my kids, I'm doing it. And initially I think he started that way until he really found out who he really was. And it stems to the gray matter. The business that he had started with his friend in college, and sold his piece of it for a month's rent for his wife, and I guess she was pregnant at the time with their first child, and that business became this multi-billion-dollar business.
Right.
And here this guy was, 50 years old. He has a son at home with cerebral palsy, a wife pregnant again at 50, and finds out that he has
working a second job at the car
finds
wash.
out that he has working a second job. He's a teacher, which we know ain't getting paid not much at all.
43,000, I think it was.
Was it? Well, then he'd been teaching a lot longer than anybody at APS. Because I think a lot of people at APS would give their right arm to make that kind of. And so, yeah, I'm working at the car wash to make ends meet, and then finds out that he's got terminal lung cancer. That he's going to die in 3 months. And so they set us all up to say, wow, what would I do if I couldn't support my family, if I couldn't afford insurance, you know, and then I go get treatment and I leave all this debt on my family. I'm not going to do it. He refused. That's not how he was going to go out. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the story, how he comes up to thinking about becoming a meth cook and selling methamphetamine is his brother is a DEA agent.
Your partner.
Yeah, his brother-in-law is a DEA, and I play his partner in the series. He goes with us on a bust, and he sees the money. He sees the lab. He's as intelligent as anybody. He's a very smart guy, and as you go through this series, you realize how intelligent Heisenberg really is, right? And Walter White. The problem is that when you start going into that kind of business, it's not a very easy way to make money. He thought it was going to be an easy way to make money, and he just got drawn in more and more and more, couldn't get himself out. And eventually, I think, at that one point when he went and faced Tuco up in, and when they beat up Jesse and took what they had cooked and took the money, and he went and he created that fulminated mercury, and goes and blows it up, and he walks out, and he goes and sits in his car, and he pounds on the. You remember that scene?
Yeah.
That's when he realized, and I think that's when Heisenberg was, in my opinion, was really born, and he just loved the rush and the power, and he just from then on was addicted to that and couldn't get himself out of it, and that's what, pushed the show forward, and it was a great way that they would put situations for him to deal with, and he would get out of them.
So it's basically a light comedy, family viewing.
Yeah.
Bring the kids.
Yeah, I think they're going to pick us up on the Cartoon Network. I guess we're going to go into. Yeah, syndication.
So now your role, Agent Gomez, Gomi, you're like a nice guy.
He was. He was actually the only character in Breaking Bad to not break bad, which is hard for Latinos in television to do. Right? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. Right? And for me to survive that long on that show was very hard for a Latino to do. So I did a couple of really good things, as a character, and thank God that the writers liked me enough to keep me alive. A little bit of a story that people may not know, that the first season, I was supposed to die in the first season. Jesse was supposed to die in the first season. The reason why that did not happen is, I don't know if you guys remember, but that was the year of the writer's strike in Hollywood. So the writers went on strike, and so we only shot 7 episodes that season. That's why there's only 7 episodes on the first season of Breaking Bad, because the writers went on strike. I love writers now because of that. Because I think Breaking Bad would have been a whole other story, especially without Jesse's character. Aaron Paul is a great actor. He's going to be one of the great American actors, and he deserves it. He's a really nice, caring humanitarian that really honestly loves people and loves his job, and he's so good at it. And I'm on his, I'm on his fan.
Yeah.
I'm one of his big fans for sure. We know how brilliant Brian is, and I've always known how brilliant Bryan Cranston is. But to find Aaron Paul out of this series, I think is one of the great accomplishments, on top of the great writing that Breaking Bad had done.
Now his character is a former student of Walt's.
That's right.
I don't know if he
Well,
did he graduate from high school?
No, he didn't graduate. He dropped out.
Yeah.
He wasn't into school. I mean, he didn't have He didn't have nothing really to encourage him. He was one of those kids that falls through the cracks.
So how recognizable a character is he in the context
For me?
of Albuquerque Public Schools?
Well, I mean, I think in any city, he's a recognizable character. For me, back in 1987, when I was unable to be successful in college because I didn't have the skills that it took, I came back to Albuquerque and I said, I don't want this to happen to any more students. This shouldn't be happening anywhere for anybody. And so I went back and I started a program. I got involved with an organization called Youth Development Incorporated. And I started a gang intervention program because I felt that a lot of the kids that were joining the gangs, the kids that were falling through the cracks, weren't motivated in the school system. And that people weren't teaching them in a way not only to build their confidence, but for them to be hands-on learning and to get what we're trying to teach them. And so I started a program called Teatro Consejo, which is, it was a theater program. And so I'd get gang kids and make them do theater with me. And I'd make them write the play, produce the play, build the sets, do the costumes, do the marketing, do the budgets, do everything. But I never told them what they were learning. All they knew is they were doing a play. Mm-hmm. That's all they knew. And through that, after we performed the play, and I did it later with film, but in the 80s I did it with theater. And through that way of teaching, I was able to teach them writing skills, research, budgets, which is math, math to build sets. You can't build anything if you don't know math. Design, composition, and not only that, they were performers. They'd have to perform. Everybody have to act in the piece. And these kids, they didn't know that. They were just making a play, and they asked them, "Oh, we're writing a play." And then after the night of we'd sell out the weekend at the Chemo Theater. People would come to see this play. People were cheering these kids' story on that they didn't even think they were important to anybody ever. These kids thought that their goal, this is what their future was going to be. They had 2 choices in their future: dead or prison. Those were their choices. After they did this play, you asked them that same question. They weren't sure. Yeah. And that's what I wanted them to think about. I didn't want them to have that was going to be the final path for them, right? And kids with confidence and kids that you give courage to can do anything. Anything. I saved all those kids. All those kids never went to prison, never ended up dead. They're still friends of mine. They're men now, and they're women now, and they have families, and they work, and they're a part of our society, and they contribute to being part of New Mexico. And it was because of programs like that, because in those years, they didn't have charter schools. They didn't have any alternative choices for children, and that disheartened me. And it took, organizations like YDI to come up with those sorts of things, or believe that I had an idea and approaching how we can get those kids, involved in education. And so I've always continued to be doing that.
Yeah.
And that was me before I was any kind of celebrity or anything like that. I was a comic at the time, and I would leave on the weekends and do stand-up comedy, and I'd come back on Monday, and I would do my program for YDI. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, by the way. I mean, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this as we talk some more, but you really are, for lack of a better word, I think it's actually a good word, an entrepreneur. As a social entrepreneur, as a reform entrepreneur, in your theater work, and your own sort of career, you're kind of making your own path. And I think the amazing thing is how you're doing that in a way that's not really. I mean, obviously you're trying to make your own path for yourself and your family, but you're bringing your community along. It's really, it's tremendous.
It's just who I am. I don't know how to be anything other than that. It's just what I think. You look at things and you say that needs to be changed, or somebody ought to fix that. And I'm not that guy. I've never had an opportunity. I come from a state that wasn't really big in comedy. We didn't have a whole bunch of comedy clubs. We had some.
Mexico's not a funny place.
It's not. The thing about New Mexico is, I could tell you right now, there's nothing there that's new. And it's not Mexico. So that's what's funny about New Mexico. No, it's just there was a lot for entertainment. It was hard to be an actor. It was hard to be a comic, And so from somebody who, went 3 years in college and still didn't have what it took to make it, was disheartening to me. And then when I went to the real world and found out they didn't even care in the acting business, that if I went to college or not, was very eye-opening to me. And encouraging for a moment, because I thought, well, then I don't even have to worry about that. I just need to get into the business. The problem is, in the 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of roles for Latinos. I mean, I studied Shakespeare for 3 years. I was a really good Shakespearean actor. I went to go audition for Shakespeare in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they go, yeah, man, you're a Mexican. And I go, nuh-uh. And I would tell them, that's what hair and makeup's for. Right? And then they said, but your name will still be Mexican on the program. They go, you willing to change your name? I go, you call my dad and tell him you're going to change his name. Right? I mean, it was hard for me. And then in film and television, there was one role, Pepe. Right? And so you had 50 million Mexicans auditioning for Pepe. So, I mean, I had a better shot of buying a lottery ticket, really. I mean, that was what it was. So I think and everybody has their journey, and I don't look bad at my journey. I don't look back at it, and I'm not mad at it. I'm not disappointed in it. I mean, it was what made me who I am. I'm the one, and I went home, then I started working for a bilingual theater company, and I wasn't even bilingual. So I had to go to my mom and go, hey, you got to teach me that because you messed up. And I blamed her, and really it was my fault. I mean, our education is really up to us. I mean, and that's something that we need to also make sure that we preach to our children, that it's your responsibility too. It's, we all have a stake in it. And so if things that you missed out on, it's because you missed out on it. And that was one thing. And there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity in bilingual theater either. And so I became a writer. And trust me, I did not want to be a writer. I went home and I wrote a play called The First Chicano President. It was based on my oldest brother, who was a very, very intelligent man who actually graduated from UNM Law School with a 4.3 at UNM Law School. And I'm going, a 4.3? I go, what, extra credits for people who are failing, man?
Yeah.
So But we always knew, and he was born with a hole in his heart. So he was born sick, and he'd always had to gone through open heart surgeries, and his body wasn't what he wanted. So for whatever reason, his brain compensated for what his body couldn't do. So he had photographic memory. He had all these cheating things that are cheating things that he developed. But he was so smart, and he was so funny, and everybody loved him. And I knew that if he would have been born healthy and had that brain, he would have been the first Chicano president. You know, I mean, he just inspired so many people, and yet he was always under my nose. But I just never really, you know, you don't really realize something until it's gone. Mm-hmm. He died at the age of 34. I was 24. But I still wrote this play about him, you know, and it was a comedy. It was funny because I wanted it to be funny because that's the kind of spirit that he had. Mm-hmm. And so it was this really great character who played the president. He was very serious and very smart, and he was surrounded by his family, right? And the family was crazy, you know. He had his cousin who had the lowrider, and his mom wanted to check his underwear and making sure that it was clean. And so all the stuff that we grew up, I put in this play and made this comedy, and I became a writer at that time. And then 3 years later, because of the writings that I had done there, I was approached to start doing stand-up comedy, and because there was no money in theater, absolutely, even when we'd sell out, the theaters in Albuquerque, there was no money. At the end, we were breaking even as being successful in theater, and I wanted stuff, you know. I'd gotten to the point in my life where I could not eat another ramen noodle. I just, you know, I wanted some meat, you know. So I went out and became a comic. It wasn't my dream. It's not what I wanted to do. But I kind of fell into it, and I was pretty good at it from the get-go, and I never looked back. I never looked back at anything other than stand-up comedy for 20 years. And through that time, I was able to, because I only worked Thursday, Friday, Saturday as a comic, my concern was that no other kid has to go through my journey. Even though I don't look back at it as a bad journey, I don't believe kids need to have to. I don't think as adults we're responsible to make sure that as many kids don't have to do that journey, you know. And I dedicated myself to that, you know, even before I had my own children. I was working with children. Now I no longer do the gang intervention because I can't afford to get shot because, like you said, I have 3 teenage daughters and they'd kill me if I got shot.
So when did, so shifting gears over to charter schools, which obviously is close to all of our hearts here.
Oh, yeah.
When did charter schools come on your radar screen?
When for me it was a breath of fresh air. I didn't even really know that movement was going on. I mean, I was doing my YDI thing. I was doing my programs and kind of had my head in that and trying to raise my daughters. They were going to public school. I didn't even think anything of it until somebody says, "Wow, there's a charter school that has a performing arts charter school. You know, your daughters are like dancers and stuff, aren't they?" And I said, "I go, they got a school like that?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, well, how do I get my kids in?" They go, "Well, it's a lottery." So I told my kids about it. My daughter got real excited. She goes, "Well, I want to go. My other kids, they didn't. So my middle child was like really excited about it. So I went and I put her name in. She got a lottery number. She got a good one, and she got in. And that's when I kind of said, "Wow, what's going on here?"
How long ago was that?
7 years ago.
Okay.
7 years ago. And I fell in love with that school. I thought, what a great idea. They were having some problems. They couldn't get a good board together. They were, at the beginning of this charter school, I'd heard there was some money issues, and money was disappearing, and there was mishandling of money and funds. And then I met the principal, and she didn't seem happy, and she was miserable, and there was this infighting. And I said, that's it. I'm going to submit myself to be on this board. I think I can help these people. And so I got elected. I got accepted to the board. They accepted my application to be on the board. And I became a board member. I think 3 days later, they elected me the vice president of the board. And then
what was wrong with the presidency or something? They didn't trust you with that? I don't understand that.
I guess they wanted to see where I was coming from. And then what happened was the board started falling apart, and it falling apart, and I didn't just think it was a strong board. So I went to the community, because I've been involved in politics for a while. I work at the Senate Chief. I'm always worried about what kind of legislation is being passed, especially when it comes to the film and television industry in New Mexico, because it's a really big opportunity for New Mexico to make money and to grow a really great big industry out there. And so I'm very involved in that, and I have been for many years. And so I met a lot of friends, and so what I did is I put a really good board together. And I called my lawyers and realtors and accountants and all my friends, and I put together this really great board, really smart people, and made me look good. And we turned things around, and we let the principal go. And I went to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, which is this little town, and stole their principal. And her name is Doreen Wynn, and she's amazing. And what I loved about her is that she was bigger than a principal. She was a superintendent. She was a grant writer. She had all those skills. She didn't know nothing about dance or art or anything, and it didn't matter. That's not what I needed. We have teachers who are doing that. We have really good teachers that are doing all of that. We just needed leadership. We needed somebody who's going to be accountable, and we needed as a board to really know how to manage and make sure that the finances were going in the right direction so it could run as smooth as we possibly can. And now we've turned around that charter school, and that's the #1 charter school in the state, is Papa. All right? And I was so proud, and I had done great things, and we were changing people's lives, and I was having dinner, and we had found, because of Breaking Bad, now we didn't live in a 2-bedroom home. We lived in a home that actually had a kitchen area, and which, now you have to eat dinner with all these people. And so I'm sitting around, I'm eating dinner, and my daughter, who was 14 at the time, or turning 15, says, so, you did a really good job with Papa. I said, oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that. She goes, and how many kids do you work with at YDI a year? And I go, probably about 50. She goes, and you're good with that? I go, what do you mean? She goes, are you good with that? I go, I guess I'm good with that. She goes, because I'm not good with that. She goes, you went to public school here, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And she goes, what about those kids? I go, what are you saying? She's saying, well, if you're happy helping 50 kids a year, then okay, I guess. I guess if that makes you feel good, whatever makes you feel good, Dad. And she walked upstairs, and so I said, I knew I shouldn't have eaten dinner today. And so then I went up to her room. I go, what are you talking about? What's going on here? And she goes, well, there's a district opening up here in our district. They're adding a chair to the APS school board. And I go, and? She goes, well, you should run for that seat. I go, I'm not running for no political thing. You have to run. You have to put yourself out there in the public eye. They put everything that I've ever done in my life in the newspaper. All right, but I'm good with it. I said, I'll do it. I said, but are you good with it? Are you good with kids coming up to you saying, I know everything about your dad? She goes, yeah, well, whatever. Just go help those 50 kids and get out of my room. She called me on this, right? She said, if this is what you're going to be, if you're going to really care about kids, if you really want to practice what you talk about choices for children and change and education and how we look at, because I always talk about the 60-40, and that's like that's a statistic that comes out a lot for me, and I keep seeing, 60. So she's right. That 40% I'm very worried about, and she's right. That was my goal.
So explain the 60-40.
40 is the kids, in my opinion, that are falling through the cracks, aren't learning the same way, the old read this, take a test, the traditional way, I guess, I don't know, without a better word, of educating our children. 60% of the kids get it. They're good at it, and I understand that. I was one of those 40% kids that wasn't, and I'm concerned about them. And so what I saw as happening at Papa were all those kids were the 40%. And yet they were thriving, and they were learning, and they were excelling, and they were actually able to take tests because they were actually retaining stuff because they were happy going to school. I wasn't happy going to school. I went to a really rough school. I went to a tough school. It was very gang infested. It was tough. It was hard. It's not the school system's fault. We have to have all kids at school, but I had to deal with those kids. That's why I love charter schools more than anything, because it gives choices for children that sometimes don't belong in a big school, right? And they deserve the same opportunities and the same education everybody does. But I also believe all children do, and that's why I went and ran for the APS school board, because we got to look at public education, and we got to start looking at how we're breaking down schools and how we're giving options to kids within that same school, either the district or within that area, or just that high school. How do we break that high school apart, or how do we create magnet schools? How do we give kids choices, right? And it's great, and I love the fact that my kids get to do dance, and that that some kids get to go study, film and television production, and some kids get to go, study, or get college credits, or there's all these great ideas about charter schools, and we promote those, and they're great. But this is what's big about me for charter schools. This is what I think is going to help save a lot of these kids and help us, is that I'm sitting outside the public academy waiting for my daughter to get out of school. And this young man comes out of his class, and he's wearing high heels. And I'm looking at this kid wearing high heels, and I'm thinking, my God, if he'd have went to West Mesa where I went, they'd have killed that kid, right? That kid he would have been miserable. They would have bullied him and created, his life would have been hell. He'd be dead by now, or he'd have committed suicide. We would have went to his house. We would have destroyed that kid. But guess what? The bell rang, and all these kids come running out of these barracks, and they run over to this kid, and they give him a hug, and he's smiling, and he's happy, and he's got an opportunity to be who he wants to be, and he gets to enjoy life, and he gets to educate himself the way he wants to, and that's the choices that we need for kids. Bigger than just, what focus our kids have. There's some kids that don't belong in a big, huge school. We know that. We went to school. We all know that. But yet, if it wasn't for the realization and me falling in love with options in school, and that charter schools provide for kids, it opened up a whole new thing for me. I see the possibilities of what we can really do and the change that we can make. And it's not, and don't get me wrong, it's not a war on public school, because I sit on a school board and I want that for all kids. But I want public education to look at what charter schools are doing and why they're successful at what they're doing, and they need to figure out how to implement that at the public school level. And I'm very fortunate that right now in Albuquerque, we're making those changes. We're looking at that. They're already, it's no longer a war. There's not this school war going on. We're all doing the exact same thing, and we all have the same exact goals. And all we really want to do, and I'm sure everybody in this room agrees with me, is we want to educate our children the best way we possibly can, and give them the opportunities that some of us may have or may have not had.
So that, yeah, absolutely. So what you describe on the APS school board is, I think, in some ways the dream that so many people